So the first thing that we're going to work on today is our breathing. Our breathing is very, very important because what it does is it really helps to facilitate the movement within our bodies. What I mean by that is when we inhale, our spine has a tendency to go into a little bit more of extension. Our rib cage opens up backwards a little bit. So when we take that big inhale, it's really, really good to use that breath when we're going into any kind of extension exercise. So the opposite can be said for our exhale. When we go into our exhales, our rib cage has a tendency to roll downward and inward. So that said, it would help us for going into our flexion exercises. So as we come into our flexion, we use our exhales and our inhales to come back down. So before we get into that though, we're going to start with just basic breathing and how we can really, really facilitate that type of breath and make it useful in everything that we do to start loosening up our spine and getting it ready for our exercise. The first thing that we're going to work on today is our breathing. Our breathing is very important because it facilitates all of the movement that we're going to go into today. It helps us relax. It helps us achieve greater motion. It does so much for us. So that's why it's so important to focus a lot of our attention onto our breathing and how it relates to and affects our movement. So how I always like to start whenever I go into any routine that I'm going to do is I always like to start with some basic breathing. So basic breathing to me is taking our inhale through our nose. While that happens, we're looking for expansion of the rib cage. We're looking for the rib cage to essentially move in more of a three-dimensional manner. So we're looking to get movement from the back portion of our ribs opening up wide towards the floor. We're looking for the sides of our ribs to expand outwards, and we're looking for the front of our ribs to raise upwards. So we're creating a three-dimensional movement with our ribs. That's the intention that we want to have when we're taking our inhales. So our big inhales come in from our nose, expanding the rib cage nice and wide. On our exhale, we just release that air out. So with our exhale, we're also looking to achieve something as well though. We're looking to find relaxation. We're looking to find those spots in our bodies where those muscles might be gripping a little bit more. And through our exhale, we have a really good ability to just release those. So our inhale gives a good engagement and expansion and movement of those muscles around the ribs. Whereas our exhale creates a sense of relaxation. So we're going to breathe like that a couple of times. So we're looking for that big, big rib cage movement. And then that releasing and settling of the body into the ground, letting gravity take over. So let's go ahead and do that a couple of times. Another thing you will notice is that I'm taking all of my inhales in through my nose. And all of my exhales, I'm releasing my air through my mouth with slightly pursed lips. The reason that I use slightly pursed lips is because when we start coming into more of our flexion exercises and facilitating our movement with our breath, we're going to need a little bit more of a compressed air, so meaning smaller space of air to move through our lips, creates a little bit better engagement of our abdominals to get us a little bit more force or flexion coming into our exercises. So when we start to fold the spine up a little bit more, you'll see how the pursed lips really starts to help facilitate that movement a little bit better. So let's go ahead and focus a little bit more on our breathing. We have one more stage that we need to go into with this. So we've already opened up the rib cage, taking that nice, big, big, wide, expansive inhale. This time now, we're going to start using our abdominals to create more movement on our rib cage. So what I mean with that is our exhale is going to change now. Our exhale went from being that facilitator of just releasing the air, allowing our body to settle into the ground, to now having a little bit more force and intention behind it. So that said, we're going to start using our abdominals to engage our exhale a little bit more. So we take our big inhale as we did before, expanding the rib cages wide to the sides, towards the back, towards the front, and on our exhale, we can also put our hands right here on the lower portion of our ribs. Our exhale, we're going to ask our abdominals to come in and do a little bit of work for us. So with that, we're asking them to draw our rib cages downward and inward into the sides. We take that big inhale, release the rib cages wide again. Our exhale, we take those points again of our lower rib cage, and on our exhale, we engage our abdominals, our oblique muscles, connecting into those hip pointers, and we're drawing the rib cages downward and inward. Again, we open the rib cages back up with our inhale. Exhale. Put a little force between it, or behind it, drawing those rib cages down. Again, inhale, back open, the rib cages wide. Let's go ahead and do this a couple of times. Finding that engagement of the abdominals, those oblique muscles on the sides of our ribs are drawing them downward and inward as we exhale. The reason we do this with our rib cage is because everything that I'm going to teach you is that we move in stages with our bodies. The first thing we always want is we want that rib cage movement. We want that ability for the ribs to spread wide. The rib cage connects directly into the spine. So if you think in that sense, whatever happens to the rib cage or whatever the rib cage does, it directly affects what happens in the spine. So our inhale, our spine starts to extend itself a little bit backwards. So that said, we can use our inhale to really facilitate any movements that we're going to do where we're looking for extension to come from the spine. On the front side, our exhale facilitates our rib cage moving downward and inward as we just experienced. So that said, when we come into any kind of flexion exercises, we're looking to use our exhale to help us engage those muscles a little bit deeper because our rib cage is naturally going into that position as we exhale. The other thing that I want to mention about our breath is that when we're taking our big inhales and then exhale connecting down, drawing those rib cages down like we just worked on that second exercise is going to help us give a place for our rib cage to actually fold into our body as we come into our flexion exercises. So I'm going to do a couple of exercises really quick to show you why the rib cage movement is so important, especially that drawing downward and inward before we go into our movement. So if I had my rib cages spread nice and wide like this, and I come into my ab prep exercise, we notice that I don't really have a place for my ribs to go. There's nowhere for them to go because they're just expanded outward. And that really creates a difficult time for my body to move. So that's why it's really, really important to work on that exhale, drawing those rib cages down and in. We've now created a place for the rib cages to fold nice and neatly inside of the body. So essentially what we're thinking about here is as we draw those rib cages down, we now have a place to fold the ribs. We have a place to tuck them in. So essentially we're feeling and imagining that we're tucking our rib cage inside of our pelvis. Inhale, we release back out. Again, we're going to come back into that same exercise as we exhale, connecting those rib cages down and in gives us that ability to flex up a lot easier than if our rib cages are nice and wide. And when that happens, I actually start feeling this a little bit more on my lower back. So everything that we have done today and talked about today, we realize how important breathing in the rib cage really is to all of the movement that we do within our bodies and also within our day-to-day lives. We find that we can work the abdominal muscles without actually taking the spine into flexion. We have that ability to really recruit those abdominal muscles to facilitate the placement and movement of our rib cages. We can do those types of exercises from our bed. We can do them from the floor. We can do them standing. We can do them sitting. It's a very, very important exercise because it's what I believe is the first step to really starting to strengthen everything related to the core. Finding the ability to create movement and action within the rib cage is so important because the rib cage connects directly into the spine. And for something that connects directly into the spine, if we have dysfunction of movement through that rib cage, it's obviously going to translate to dysfunction in our spine. So figuring out how to breathe, how to move the rib cage, how to create the best movement around the rib cage is going to help us so greatly in our life, and it's going to help us so greatly in our exercises. So I appreciate you being with me today, and I look forward to the next time we talk. I will see you later.